If you look at all your relationship frustrations and the areas that really bug you about dysfunction, toxicity in your relationship interactions, I guarantee you that a rejection mindset is in there somewhere. And we're going to talk about how these patterns that keep happening over and over again can be a sign that it's time to heal a rejection root in your life. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark DeJesus here with my wife, Melissa. Welcome to Transformed You. If you've been enjoying our content, please subscribe to us on YouTube. Check out my website at markdejesus.com. This show is also supported by those who are generously donating to the work. You can do a one-time donation, or you can consider become a Transformational Tribe partner. In doing that, you get access to some partner-only materials and ways that you can be blessed in your transformational journey. Also, we love to recommend Audible. All our books are available on audio, and you can take advantage of those for your transformational journey. So we get into this subject of rejection, right? And I feel like in the years and years and years of working with my own relationship patterns and doing a lot of work in helping people, helping groups in different settings, I don't feel like relationships stand a chance when a rejection root is having an influence. The problem is rejection influences most of our relational patterns. Right. And if people find themselves saying, why is it that keeps happening? I think it's time to look at where is rejection having a root in my mindset, in the way that I approach relationships, in the relationships I draw in the relationships I move towards. It really, I find, if you look at this and look at this honestly, it can do a complete renovation, but it takes some sobriety. It takes some honest assessment.
Yeah, I think, you know what, too? When you can see it and start to go, oh, that person, when I interact with them, has these kinds of patterns, and then you can look at your, like, it kind of takes a twofold approach of like watching how other people react and then going, wait, do I do that? Understanding it can be confusing, I think, for some people. So if you can, like, I feel like a twofold approach of understanding the people you're interacting with, getting a better idea of where their yucky junk is pinging with your yucky junk. You can kind of look at both people in the relationship. It helps, don't you think?
Totally. I think it really helps. And I think that one of the things I notice is that rejection steals your self-awareness ability. So you don't know how you come across. You don't realize how you're taking in the filter. Your perceptions are all seen as fact, true and accurate. So you don't stop and go, wait a second, the way that I'm seeing that person, is this really accurate? Is this really healthy? Is this the way that I should be?
Right, which that's where I think it can help when maybe even you're talking with somebody that understands rejection, and you can say, okay, look at that person. Do you see how they do this, this, and that? Do you see that in yourself? Because I think it helps when you can see it outside yourself sometimes, and then you go, oh, I do that.
Right.
Because it's a hard one. Like you're saying, it's hard to self-identify it sometimes. Like you could be in total denial because you're like, no, how I feel is right. This is how I see it. This is how I feel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's why in chapter 3 of Exposing the Rejection Mindset, I talk about a lot of different examples that people seem to manifest when it comes to, rejection root issues, because it spawns everywhere.
Right.
And it causes me to have a lens when I approach relationships. And I think that it takes first of all, a sense of like, okay, I've got some goofy patterns.
Yeah,
so for me,
we all can admit that we do.
Right. So for me, it came up in relationships, even in dating relationships, where it's like, wow, okay, you go around the mountain a few times and then you kind of go, oh, the problem is not everyone else. Because typically in relationships, when you run into problems, the first response is there's something wrong with that person. They don't listen to me. They ignore me. They're rude to me. They don't do this. They're toxic. They and you typically have the same themes that go on.
Right.
And so sometimes the response from people, and I have to help them walk through this, is when we talk about a rejection root in their relationships, they take it as though I'm doing something wrong. That's why these things are happening.
Right.
So it's like becomes a self-accusing thing.
Right.
So like people, like certain people have like patterns where people are abusive towards them, and it keeps happening. Patterns where people don't listen. Patterns where people twist your communication all the time, right? Yeah. And so when you bring out rejection, they hear it because it messes up our hearing and what we're hearing. They take it as blame. I did something wrong to like maybe deserve this. And it's like, no. What you need to realize is the enemy takes your patterns of hurt. He'll take one, usually going back to childhood. He takes the ones that have been running in your family, takes the ones that erupted in your childhood, and now he wants to keep that going and building so that he builds a case in court,
right.
in the courts of heaven, so to speak, to like keep accusing you and keep drawing these situations to wear you out to get you to come into agreement with rejection. So it's recognizing what's following you and being aware of the internal agreements that keep you aligned with that.
Yeah. And it helps to understand when other people are operating in it, so then you can then know how to deal with it. Because once someone else's rejection pings off and you have it, like, bye-bye everybody in the scenario. Like and really that's the goal of rejection, is to keep everybody out of healthy relationships, So let's walk through some of the things that are traits when it comes to rejection in relationships, like things that manifest.
Yeah, and I think that if we can just be self-aware, that I noticed early on as the light bulb came on, because you'll have a light bulb experience. It's like taking the pill in the Matrix. It's like once you see it, you can't go back, because you'll see now how the world operates, where like the first level I mentioned is you just don't have a self-awareness. So it's like this. It's like the guy who just keeps over talking and won't stop talking. And everyone in the room goes, man, every time he just won't stop talking. He just hijacks the conversation. He's not aware of it.
Right. It's kind of like a good example is like Michael from The Office, when Jim would look at the camera and be like,
correct.
He just is so self-unaware.
Yeah, Michael from The Office is a great example of rejection in work in so many forms, like the birthday episode when it was his birthday. And he couldn't get, this is a good example of neediness, where like he can't get it out of his head that it's my birthday and I want everyone to recognize my birthday.
Right.
And Kevin is going through being diagnosed with skin cancer.
Right.
And Michael's mad because that trial that he's
taking away,
is taking the attention away. So that's another rejection issue. Is like you have a neediness that when it's drawn to someone else, like
you can't handle it.
You get mad.
Yeah.
Because really you want the attention on yourself, and you want so I think that it takes like honest feedback of like, yeah, I'm starting to realize this, and even hearing from somebody else that's like, yeah, why don't you lay back a little bit? The problem is that if anyone brings up something connected to your rejection issue, get ready for anger to kick up.
Right.
So like I would venture into this with people. I'm like, all right, God, I'm going to take the jump, and this could either go really bad or we're about to have major breakthrough, because it would happen over and over again in our pastoring work.
Yeah.
And it's like it would all come to a head, and I'm like, all right. And like one phrase that I would say, because there was some people who would like excessively look for attention in different ways.
Yes. Yep.
And I would say this way. I would say, I want you to know you're so loved. You're so accepted, validated. This is a safe place. Now, this is after time. This wasn't like first meeting.
Right. You have to earn the right.
This is years, right? I just want to encourage you. You don't have to try so hard. That's what I would.
Right.
Because what would happen is the neediness would cause them to overtalk, over attention, and it would wear on people, and then people would be like a void.
Withdraw.
So therefore,
that feeds it even more.
So therefore, they would reject the person, which then feeds their history, keeps them stuck. So I was like, I try to look at positive ways to reinforce, this issue, rather than, because you don't want to make people feel shame, but sometimes it's very difficult to avoid it.
Yeah.
So it's like, you don't have to try so hard. And I could see the anger rising up. And I'm like, just hang in there. You're loved. You're loved. And some people would break through. It's like you could see something lift off. And they're like, yeah. Because they realize I'm worn out, I'm frustrated, I'm exhausted. And then others would go, he doesn't love me. Right. And they would listen to rejection, because that's what rejection says. Rejection wants to be rejected, and it wants to convince you of a case. That person doesn't love you. And it wants to, because if the enemy can do that, get you in a case where that person doesn't love me, I now lock them out. And over the years, you lock more people out, more and more people out. Then you're isolated. And in the isolation, you're now opened up for losing your mental health. You're opened up to darkness. You're opened up to the dangers of emotional isolation.
Yeah, well, rejection is such a twisted thing because it's an insatiable need to want to feel, it pings at your wounds of wanting to feel loved, safe, be seen, be heard. But what you're doing, you want it so bad, but yet it's doing the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's such a nasty, twisty, ugh.
Right, because the end goal is that you be rejected, that you just convince yourself, I'm rejected, I'm not loved.
Right.
And at first, it just uses little references, and it just causes you to look for that. It's interesting how people can walk into a room and there could be 97 people that love you of the 100 people, and you just remember the 3 people, that right?
Don't give
Isn't
you
it interesting how I remember when I would lead worship, and we would have these amazing moments where God's presence would be with us, and I would be tuned into the 2 people with their arms folded,
right? Instead of just being like, this is great. And most of the people are loving it and being, because it really goes to the core of you being totally secure in who you are.
Correct.
That's it.
That's the ultimate goal.
That's it.
But we're not.
No. I want it. Yeah.
So I started to notice this in my life. And for me, I felt like when the light bulb came on, I said, it's everywhere. And I feel like if you can start with that, where you can go, rejection is everywhere, and that's where you kind of exhort a lot of people.
Right. I do say that. I'm like, listen, when you're going to tackle this thing, you have to know that it's in every pattern of everything you do throughout the day. You have to re-examine, and I've used this extreme example, like how you get up and set your day and get the paper and get your coffee and where you go to have security in what feels good. Like, you have to look at the whole tapestry of your life.
So true. So true.
It's in everything. Once it's there, it's there.
I found that when I got that, it's not like to overwhelm you with darkness.
Right.
But it's just to help you to realize, no, I want God's love to invade all these areas. That's the goal of uprooting rejection. There is no separation. I'm loved. He's here. He's with me. He loves me. And I can trust. I can let my guard down. And if I get hurt, I can rebound with God and get back into the game. I have tools now to walk this out. I don't have to be a victim now of what people do to me.
Right.
But then I began to realize now this goes way back in my early pastoral work. This goes back to like youth ministry days, music production ministry days, worship. I noticed there were certain people that when you would sit down and talk with them, this is my heart. My heart is, we can solve this if we just sit down and talk. Right. And any pastor that's watching this is chuckling right now because they're like, yeah, that doesn't solve everything. But I had a sense of like, if you just understood me, then we'll be fine. And I realized that then the more I talked, the worse it got. And then the more amplified it got. And then it would start triggering stuff in me where like I'm losing my centeredness.
Right. You're like, I need to email them and over-explain. I need to call them and say, did you understand what I meant? Like, so that you're ultimately at the end of the goal. The goal is to then go, I'm at peace with how this person feels with me.
Right. So then it would bring up my rejection issues of I don't like that we're not good.
Right.
And so which would lead me into I feel like I got to do something to solve this, when a lot of times you just got to just like don't panic, just let it sit.
The worst thing in that is to be okay to do nothing.
Right. Right, totally. And so
I can't.
So going back to what I was sharing is that you would end up with 3-hour meetings that went nowhere. Nowhere. Like seriously, and a lot of pastors talk about this. And you know, I say pastors because that's my history. Many of you, you know, you could be in business, executive board meetings. It's everywhere. You sit down, you got the high maintenance person, right? If you name any high maintenance person in your business, it's all rejection. It's rejection rooted stuff. So I found once I saw this, I'm like, no, I'm not doing these exhausting conversations. Like when I feel it goes nowhere, it's like we got to let God bring some healing.
Right, because you could say everything in the most perfect way. You could validate somebody. You could, if they even receive any of it, it's momentary. And you're just spinning out. Like you're never going to say, when you're dealing, I'll take it from the standpoint of dealing with someone with rejection, you never going to say it right. It's never going to land properly.
Right. And then you have the land of the twisties.
Dun, dun, dun. Right.
Which is, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So in general, when you're having conversation with people, you just need to know this about yourself. Are you ready? You don't hear what's being said. You hear a filter of it. Even if you're healthy, you hear a filter of it. Because if you understand your brain can only compute so much. So all day long, it's like, for example, when you get in your car and you're driving, your brain doesn't go right foot, hit pedal, turn wheel. Your brain doesn't go head down this road unless you have no idea where you're going, then you're a GPS or whatever. You're an autopilot when you're driving. You're an autopilot actually driving the car, and you're thinking about something else, and your brain's constantly like filtering down to what we call a focus, what you focus on. When you're listening to somebody talk, it's hitting your filter. What they're saying is hitting your filter. So you're filtering in what you think they mean by it. Now, that filter is based on how many years of history you've been living, and you're picking up on certain signals, like, am I safe with this person? Am I not? What do they mean by this? You're tuning out some stuff they're saying. Like, you ever talk to somebody and there's like, lights are on, nobody's home, they're not really paying attention.
Well, because I think the stuff that you just said is more subconscious. What's at the forefront is people are already thinking about they're not hearing what you're saying. They're thinking about their position in it, their stand on it, and what they want to say to you. So
that's the biggest forefront. So so I went down to the bottom, came up to the surface. That's what's in the front. It's like we're really not listening. You know how the Bible says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to wrath. We're quick to get teed off. We're quick to talk. We're so slow to listen.
Right. We just want our narrative out, and that's it.
Right. Because rejection says, I need to be heard. Right. And that's what we live in the culture right now, is the culture of the need to be heard. And we have all these avenues now where, like 20 years ago, if I was mad, I would just tell you. And I guess that's it.
Right.
Or call a few friends. Now it's like Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I can tweet
this. Put a passive aggressive.
I can write a blog. I can podcast about this. I can do that. I can make a video. I can do all these things now that we can go into where the right to be heard, I must be heard. So now what rejection's doing is it's inflaming the wound, and it's encouraging. If you're offended, you have the right to be offended, and you have the right to communicate this. And it's like, wow, we're losing our ability to reason. So going back to the twisties. So we're in this whole thing where we're not even really hearing what's being said. So therefore, we respond and talk out of what you said. We already have something we want to say. We're not really listening and understanding the other person. So then they hear our twisted hit back, and then they're responding to that. So now we're having relationship dodgeball, where we're just like throwing stuff at each other.
Right.
And And then it gets to the point where you don't even really know where you're going. This is classic in marriage.
Marriage, right.
Right? I mean, how many times have we gone through this where it's like,
Then you start to feel insane. Then the crazies come and everyone's spun out.
Right.
It's
right.
bad news. Right.
And I feel like the only way that you and I have been able to break through this is like we got to work on our own rejection issues. Because
Right.
you have certain nerves that get hit, and I have certain nerves that get hit.
Yeah.
We have to be aware of them personally, but also be aware of them relationally. So when we talk, we're like, "Oh, I'm hitting that wound." Okay, let me backpedal. I'm sorry. This is what I meant.
Right.
This is my heart. And that's really how maybe we can talk about how to defeat this rejection issue in relationships, and then we can kind of go into more examples. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay.
So I learned this when some really challenging relationships I was working through. And I was in the midst of really uncovering rejection in my own life. And I'm like, God, how does this work? And I was brought to the passage of scripture where Peter, James, they both talk about it. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he'll lift you up. Resist the devil and he will flee. And I just saw this picture of sometimes we try to resist the enemy and we don't humble ourselves, right? There's certain relationship problems that only get healed through humility, not in being right, not in winning the argument, not in even like being understood. And that's the problem we have culturally is we want to be right and we want to be heard. That dominates the narrative. So no healing happens, right? And so I said, all right, God, I got to let down my need to like explain, win this. I humble myself. So if I talk to them again, it's like my ammunition's down. And I found in like one particular interaction, the posture of humility won the relationship. Now, did all the little details of all the things get resolved? Not necessarily, but I learned to, like, as the proverb writer says, I forget the actual wording, but it's the glory. I think it's the glory of a man to overlook an offense.
Right.
In other words, like, it's empowering to go, I'm not going to hang on to that.
Right. Because really, it's kind of like, in a way, how we relate forgiveness. It's not about the other person, it's about you. Because even if you start to recognize rejection in your own life, it really doesn't mean the other person's going to stop doing it. And so that's, gosh, at the end of the day, that's kind of, it can feel defeating a little bit because not everybody's going to recognize, and you're not going to have like amazing interactions with everybody all of a sudden once you recognize this. But the end goal of it is you then walking away, keeping your peace and not going insane and not being spun out in this stuff.
Right.
Because it's once you start seeing it, you go, okay, wow, I see it everywhere. And you can get a little disheartened because it's like, man, everybody's a mess.
Right. Because you can get discouraged that everyone's such a hot mess.
Right.
They're a hot mess and they're not realizing they're a hot mess and they're blaming it on you and just shutting you out. And it's like, man, we could have had something great.
Right. You know? So I just want to,
I think that we live in a culture that is highly offendable. Okay. Let's just kind of back off from like the news culture and all that, because that's, it's really intense there. Just in a local, like church body, local level interaction.
Families,
we're so highly, use the word triggered, so easily set off, easily offended, that we don't take time to realize, wow, I need to deal with this. Why do I keep getting hit in this area in a way that's destroying my relationships?
Yeah.
And so we write people off, and then it's like, that's it. That person's the devil. That person,
Yeah. Yeah. My heart can go into so many different directions when it comes to this topic, because at the end of the day, I feel like it's just hitting, as you're talking anyways, let me rewind my sentence there for a second. It's making me think about just even as a child and walking into a room. And I have, my dad and I have actually talked about this. When I was a teenager, I tried out for cheerleading, and I didn't practice because I was wreck and obsessiveness and all kinds of stuff. So when I went to try out, I froze and I didn't do good. So I came home humiliated, embarrassed, so heartbroken about myself and like, what is wrong with me? Why? Okay. So I come home and my dad is in the backyard and I'll never forget it. I can see it like it just happened. He's at the back picnic table and he's doing he's cutting something. He's cutting wood. He's doing something on the back table and he's not looking at me. And I came in the backyard and I needed him to talk. I needed him to say, hey, what's wrong? To turn to me and look at me and affirm me and let me talk out my pain. And he didn't. He just, what's going on? So because of my need to want to get affirmed in it or be told something, I tell him what happened. And he never looked up at me. Oh, that's too bad. And he just kept doing his woodwork stuff. And that fed in me a need of
and you didn't,
of needing love, of needing affirmation.
And you didn't know in the moment. You don't realize in the moment, this is what I need, this is what I'm not getting. What you do in the moment is you just cope and survive.
Right.
So that's why.
Which then developed. So go ahead.
That's why it's important for people to mature. You need a healthy look back in your history. Christians have historically been bad at this. We just want to shove it down. It's under the blood. Don't want to think about it. It's like, no, this is helpful to look back because you didn't have the ability to know in the moment how this affected you.
Right.
So that pattern of wanting to be loved and express a weak, vulnerable hardship, now you have a pattern that follows you.
Yes, because it built something in my brain. That brain connection was not made as a teenager of the man in your life that you look to, you're not safe, you're not loved, you're not valued enough to be looked at. So that need built inside of me to get that from people when I interacted with them. And I would just awkwardly stay in conversations to try to feel better. And if someone gave me somewhat of something like a dog panting, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to be my friend? That thing grew and grew and grew. And like you're saying, it's good to look back and recognize where this thing came from, because ultimately rejection is highlighting your deep need to want to be affirmed, loved, feel safe, and just okay with yourself.
Right. It's really good. It's very, very good. And if we can recognize this, it's going to improve our marriages, it's going to improve our relationships to realize, okay, God, how can I learn what's the narrative theme that I keep bumping into? And I tell people this a lot. You can find it when you have problems in relationship. What do you kind of go to? Do you avoid any conflict, right? That's a big one. You become a peace keeper versus a peacemaker.
Right.
A peacemaker is somebody who engages and helps create peace. A lot of people say, well, I'm a peacemaker. You're a peacekeeper.
Right.
Don't rock the boat. It's
really cowardly to be, right?
Correct.
Because it's right.
Yeah, it's driven by fear and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what will help us all grow is when we all do self-reflection and self-awareness and go, God, heal this in me. Because even if, let's say you're in, people do this all the time. You're in a church and you want to point to the people that bug you or seem to hurt you and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, that may be true, but do an inventory. What agreements do I have? And this is really tough, especially if you've been around abusive people. It's important that if you've been around abusive people, you don't create agreements that encourage that or cause you to go in a complete opposite direction of everybody's abusive.
Right.
Right? Because you can go one of two ways. You can kind of just get used to abuse and you're drawn to abusive people and you kind of just tolerate it, right? That's one thing. And then you're like, woe is me, God rescue me. And it's a victim mentality. And then there's another extreme where it's like, that hurts, man, I will shut off and you're never getting near me.
Right.
And it's being aware of which pendulum do you go on? Do you find yourself continuing the patterns? Or do you find yourself going into a whole other pattern that then shuts you off from the potential that God has for you. Because all our potential is relational. It's not just like financial or successful or whatever people think it is. It's all relational. Whether it's a calling, whether it's your family, all your breakthrough is relational. If you can look at it that way, then you can see, all right, here's where I can go and here's where I can improve. It's in my relationship grid. How do I, and you start with, what's the grid I have when I first approach a relationship? Is it like, hey, I'm looking forward to get to know this person, and we'll see, we'll have a great talk, and if not, it's all right. What we typically do is, oh man, is this person going to like me? I'm nervous, and which is fine. Yeah. It's fine, but it's like, be aware of those things in a fruitful way so you work through them with God. Otherwise, you're just going to blame everybody else. And then I've noticed a fascinating trend is that the pattern of woundedness from your childhood typically follows you and creates what I call the rejection setup.
Yeah. You want to explain it?
Yeah. So if you were ignored as a kid, you have like certain moments.
Because we talk about this a lot. You
enter situations and people just tend to ignore you, and you tend, because you're used to it, it becomes a familiar pattern that you kind of lean into. So if you were ignored as a child growing up and you're now in a business meeting and there's a group of you there, you'll lean towards the seat that's furthest away. You'll kind of posture yourself in a way that doesn't invite people to ask what you think. You won't, sit in a way that's engaging.
Right.
You'll kind of cower back, have a more quiet posture. It feeds. No one wants to hear what I want to say. You leave the meeting. No one even asked you anything. And you don't say it out loud. It's just subconsciously, there's an agreement of people don't really care what I have to say.
Right. You know what? We notice this a lot too. There's a specific instance that just came to my mind, especially when we were pastoring. And I said to you, there was somebody that there was kind of like a ping pong.
All the time.
And I said to you, do you notice that you ignore that person? And you didn't even realize it. You had no, and this is what we're talking about in understanding the rejection setup. And I said to you, you ignore that person. You were like, I do?
Right.
And that's the thing. There's a setup.
I was defensive at first. I was like, I'm not ignoring them. And you're like, watch the next time you interact. And sure enough, the person came up and my body went like this.
Yeah.
And it's like something controlled my posture, and like my body's turning.
Right.
And I had to I'm going to not give in, because it's true. We fall into patterns, and the person who gets ignored, we kind of just...
We feed it, and you don't realize you're feeding it. Most of the time, we don't realize it. Like that person you're avoiding, or they make you feel awkward, or like stop and go, what is going on here?
And then at times where like when we would have meetings and the person that typically would never say anything would go, hey, what do you think? And you'd hear him talk and you'd go, whoa, that was good.
Right.
And you're like, you need to talk more.
Right, because the devil knows.
Keep
everybody, right.
Because then let's go the opposite direction. The person who has a rejection need to be heard, and they respond to it by always over talking. They're the ones who always ask the questions, always like they have no regulator.
Self-awareness. They have no self-awareness that they're even doing it. Right.
Yeah. Like when you ride a golf cart, they have they call it like a governor on it that like keeps the speed, from going to, they don't have one. It's like that's broken in their engine. And so they just keep going and going. And they need to sit back and listen, because their talking doesn't allow them to receive.
Right.
And listen in. Great relationships. The people that have the best relationships are phenomenal listeners.
Yeah.
And so in order to be a phenomenal listener, you got to work on your filter and work on, okay, I'm not here to get all my neediness fulfilled. I'm here to bless the relationship.
Or to fill somebody else's neediness, because I think I do that. We joke about this a lot, and we've celebrated where you go out to coffee with somebody and there's a moment of silence and you just sit through the silence.
Yeah.
You want to challenge your rejection issues. If you have to fill in that space and you have to overtalk because you feel awkward, that's a good place to start. If you are not comfortable enough in yourself to sit there in silence.
Yeah, you and I would do that a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Because we would sometimes talk with people that weren't very engaging. And
because they're wanting stuff from us. They just want it, right?
so in the silence, you're like, yeah. So hey, I was reading this book the other day, and then you walk away going, why is my voice tired? And like my chest is tired, and like my head hurts,
right?
And we were like, yeah, we're trying.
Why
too
do
hard.
we feel the need to fill this and try so hard and like feel like it was crazy? So we got celebrated where we come home from people and we're like, guess what? There was silence, and I didn't do anything,
right? And yeah, we would try to practice like Jedi level,
right?
Like being okay with yourself. And
Total
it's like,
yoga,
yep, I practiced it, and I didn't force myself to have to carry it. I let the relationship interaction just organically flow.
All right, so I'm going to throw a scenario at you. Okay, so say you have a person, like it's so bad. Okay. They are just standing there either at events or wherever you are, and they just want to talk to you. Like they are looking at you like, just talk to me. Hey, I have something to say to you. They're like a little dog in heat, like a puppy that's like, hey, can I talk to you? And you see the rejection. You're like, how do you deal with that when you're dealing with somebody? So like all right, I'm starting to recognize this. I see where I fed it. How do you start to healthily deal with people who manifest that stuff?
I think, well, my pattern is not necessarily what I think everybody needs to do, because historically, I would just activate my wrap it up skills as quickly as possible.
You're good with that. You're so good. Yeah.
Just kind of wrap it up and move on. Then I realized, no, I need to, as I began to experience heart healing, realize this is a broken person that just wants to be heard. So I would
right, because it's giving love with boundaries.
Right. So I would first go, do I really need to like rush on from this person to the next thing? Right. So that then dealt with my busy, got to do my next thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I like about living down here where we live now, is that whenever there's an interaction, like somebody comes over to...
And everybody loves Jesus down here.
Anyone comes
that
to do...
helps, sorry. Just does when the electrician does and you're... No, sir,
anyone does like pest control, or they're coming to like fix something, you're going to have a minimum to 30 minutes of just talking.
Yes, they love to chat it up, and they're chill. Like, hey, it takes as long as it takes, everybody.
And then that would rub against my kind of New England, like, okay, we're going to do that.
You said you were going to be here at 1. It's 3:00.
Move on to the next thing. Right. Well, no, it's like,
what I mean.
When they're here, it's like, move on to the next thing, go. And now it's like, no, relationship interactions first. So maybe this is an opportunity to bless someone. And so to go back to your example, it's like, maybe this is an opportunity for me to just, do I really need to rush to the next thing? Let me just take a moment and just show them attention and care. It doesn't mean I have to stand here for 3 hours.
Right. Because a lot of the time, and it just made me kind of laugh to myself, like you start to almost have a panic attack.
Right.
You get this tightness across your chest, like,
right.
I don't know if I can handle this person.
How do I get out of this?
How do I not? Right. And really, there's a call, like you're saying, there's a call to a higher level of relationship engagement. It doesn't mean you have to be besties and hang out with these people. But when we're getting down to the core of it, to heal our lives, we need to help heal each other. And that means you being safe and loving and kind. It doesn't mean you're like I said, doesn't mean you're like, hey, let's go have a party together and let's hang out and let's do something every day. That's not what I'm saying. But there's an element of your presence in the body of Christ, within your family, within certain things where you can start to bring out and be a standard and example, because we need them. It has to start somewhere for then everybody else to look at and go, oh, wait a minute, what do they have that I want and I need?
It goes back to when we always say,
what I mean?
Yeah, it goes back to when we always say, like, if you know someone's story and you know what they've been through, it helps to explain why they talk and won't shut up. It explains why they withdraw, sit in the back row, they don't say anything. It explains why they are fabricated, right? And they have this personality that's just like fake, and you're like, man, this isn't really them.
You're exhausted by it, right?
And you understand, no, there's a story there. Or maybe you explain why they just seems like they're just always so angry all the time. They like wear it, or they're disconnected to their feelings. There's a story and there's a history that built up to that. They didn't just one day decide, I'm going to be this way. There's like a whole process that led him to that point. So then it leads you to relationship first. I want to be compassionate. How can I be compassionate in this moment? It doesn't mean I need to be their best friend.
Or take abuse or be put in. It doesn't mean that. We're not saying that it gives a license to that.
No.
But it can, like you're saying, back to the compassion, understanding stories is everything.
So to summarize it, the way you deal with rejection issues in relationship is you have to first assess what's the level of intimacy we have. Is this a guy I just met in CVS that I'm talking to, and his over talking, and I have to go? Is this somebody I see every week at church but I'm not really friends with? Is this a guy I work with or a lady I work with? Is this a family member? Is this a best friend? Is this somebody I'm married to? Is this a leader I'm really, okay? So the level of intimacy determines the level of approaching it. The lower the level of intimacy, it's like just for that moment, it might be good to just pause, acknowledge the person, and do your best. Like I try to extend my moment with the person just a little bit beyond my comfort zone. Like, okay, I feel like I want to walk away from this. This guy's talking way too much. Let me just extend it a little bit further to stretch my patience and my grace. Yeah, because it can be very, very small, right? So then, but then if it's like a close relationship, you need to have that. But then cultivating that love relationship where it's like shown you love, and then as you move closer and closer, the issues come to the surface. Like, hey, let's talk about this and grow. That's what the pattern Jesus had. Like he knew Judas was a betrayer, right? He knew it.
Right.
It's not like all of a sudden it's like, oh, at the last minute, Judas, how'd you do this to me? He knew it. What did he do? Got closer and closer, and he goes, hey, let's have communion, guys. Right? Closer. Because that's what covenant does. So in those closer relationships, in the tightness, as you build relational credibility, and you earn the ability to, in kindness, speak like, hey, I feel like this is something that I've observed. It's just something. And you find ways to speak about it that's empowering.
Right. It's an invitation.
That make sense?
Yes, because then it's an invitation to the person. Are you going to then join in covenant relationship with me, or is this just going to die out? Which then brings you to making boundaries in your life. Because really, ultimately, the biggest thing of dealing with rejection in your life is you really getting love for self. Yeah. It brings security. It brings safety. It brings the security enough to look at somebody and say, listen, I love you and I want relationship with you, but I can't have this be toxic. How many of us wish we had that kind of security and power in our own voice in our life? If I had that in my life, which to me always brings me back to the most basic scripture, but is the most powerful scripture. Make your yes, yes, and your no be no. If I knew that and had the confidence in that my entire life, my whole life would have had a completely different trajectory. Right. Completely different. Because it would be like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Or, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do that and I'm going to do what I have to do. Oh my goodness.
Because then it creates clarity in communication. Where we often live in like that. Yeah, so we'll see. And like nothing.
I'm not comfortable with this, but you know what? I mean, if you want me to go, I guess I'll do it. Right. And then you're 4 hours spun out, you're home, you're exhausted, you have no time for your kids, and you're like, oh my gosh, why couldn't I just get up and walk away?
So get a hold of the rejection mindset. That's.
I could go on and on.
I think that's really the end game application that we've been talking about in this series. Yeah. The good news is it's available in paperback, in audio, in Kindle, and also I have an e-course. A lot of groups and people are watching through it together, answering the questions, doing the prayers that are included. And it really will do a number of healing in your relationships, because instead of feeling like you have to point out everybody's issues, like just think about, try to go through it as a couple, go through it as a family, and work on work on yourself and bring that to the discussion. It'll really change how you guys do life together. So take the time to invest in that resource. Again, you can get it on audiobook, and you can get by going to markdejesus.com/audible, AUDIBLE. You can use that. It helps support the work that we're doing. Again, consider becoming a tribe member that helps support this show. You can also do a one-time donation as well. But we thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen or to watch. please take the time to subscribe on YouTube and get on our mailing list as well. And you can do that by going to markdesus.com and really click anywhere, because there's all kinds of places where you can even get a free ebook and be blessed in your journey. So thanks so much. Thanks for having that discussion, just being vulnerable. We pray that this will bless you in your life and your journey. See you next time, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.